Hello and good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you are. I hope this video finds you well. It is winter here in Northern California, and it has also been nearly a year since I first had this bike built up with the component group that you see here. And I did do a whole series on this bike. If you're not familiar with it, I'll put a link up here somewhere to that video series. So I documented the whole process basically that I went through from the design all the way through construction of this Fitz Cycles steel all-road, all-terrain randonneuring / light credit card touring bike. It wears a lot of hats. And that was the goal for the bike when I set out to build it. I wanted something that was basically an everyday bike that can kind of do almost everything very well. Of course, not do everything perfectly, but it actually lives up to its expectations in a lot of ways. So in this video, what I wanted to do is come back to the discussion of this bike. I want to do a long-term review today. I want to talk about some of the parts that I chose, the pros, the cons. I'd like to talk about the tires, the wheels, maybe some of the other components that you see on the bike here, if I could remember to do it. This video might be a little bit longer than normal, but I would like to cover as much as I can. I've had a whole bunch of questions since I made the first documentation series of this bike build. And if you haven't seen that, I'll go ahead and put a link up here somewhere on the screen. And if you haven't checked it out and you're interested after seeing this video, or if you want to go watch it before you watch this video, there's a lot of, they're long videos, but they do have a lot of information about the choices that I've made. And so in this video, I think it'll be fun to come back to this discussion and sort of see how it shook out. Did it live up to its expectation? What were some of the things that I did that I might change if I were to do it all over again? And just my general impressions of the bike. Anyway, with that said, let's get into talking about this bike. So first thing I'm going to do is go through the components that are on here. I'll go back and refresh a little bit about what the frame was and how it was made. And then we'll just dive in and see where we go. So I'm going to have this kombucha while we're doing this discussion. I'm not sponsored, of course, by anyone, actually, but this kombucha here, this is a Revive. I think it's a local kombucha for the area here in Northern California, but it's really good. And this one's the hibiscus, so I've been really having a hard time not drinking these. This one does not have caffeine in it, but it's really, really good. So anyway. Enough of my non-sponsored plugs. I'll try not to do that too often here on this channel. All right, so let's go over the bike. I'll try to remember most of the components here, and I'll explain what they are. So let's just start maybe at the top here. Let's start at the handlebar. So up here at the handlebar, we have some more or less vintage Suntour brake levers. These are the Aero brake levers. And they're attached to a Nitto randonneuring bar. I don't remember if it's the B135 or the 136, but you can kind of see it's got a very deep drop, and it also has a flare to the side here. It flares out a little bit, and it has kind of a flare up as well. So it's a really comfortable bar. It has sort of a long top to it right here, and I really like this handlebar. It's been very comfortable. So I really like this handlebar because it gives me a lot of options for staying comfortable, and that's especially important on a long ride. Over here I have the Nitto, they used to call this the Pearl, but now it's just the Nitto, I don't know, it's a Quell stem, and it is, I think, a 90 millimeter in length, but that doesn't really matter to you guys because you choose whatever length fits for you. I do have center pole brakes, so this is the brake cable hanger up here, which is part of this headset. This is a Chris King headset, and it's a 1-inch threaded style. What else? The brakes, as I just mentioned, are a vintage Mayfac center pole. These are the Mayfac Raids, so they have a really long reach, and they are Brazon mounted. So that means you get rid of the backing plate that would be center mounted. You can eliminate all of that because the bike had custom made Brazons welded to the fork and to the seat stays on the back. Coming across here, hope I didn't forget anything, you have the seat post. This is also a Nitto seat post, and up here I have a Brooks Gablier, I believe it's pronounced, saddle. It has the titanium rails, and this was the honey color, I think, or maybe that's the Brooks, but it's the kind of a lightish brown color leather, and it has gotten darker with use, so it's getting a little bit more patina on it, and I really like the way it's starting to look, because it's getting darker than it was when I first bought it. And the seat post here is really nice. The Nitto stuff I find to be high quality. It has a 2-bolt adjuster, so you can set the angle of the saddle, and it has rails. It has the clamp on the rails for, and pretty much an infinite amount of adjustability there. Coming on down, we have the Nitto brake. I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is the rear brake cable hanger. This mounts onto the seat post binder bolt. Now these are also center pole brakes with the Brazons, just like the front. And I have the Cool Stop pads. Now these pads have been on the bike from the beginning, almost. I tried the Cool Stop cartridge style brake pads with the 4 dots. And at the time when I was first getting these set up, I wasn't really pleased with the overall performance of those pads. I felt like the dots themselves were compressing too much. The thickness of that material is pretty thick, so there's quite a bit of movement for compression, and I just felt that it wasn't able to get a good stopping power with the amount of cable pull that these levers pull. But I could have had the setup incorrectly adjusted, so it could have been a fault of me and not the brake, so I don't want to criticize those pads. But since going to these Cool Stop, I forget what they're called, but they're basically like a very cheap, they're a pad that's integrated with the post. And if I can remember, I'll put a link somewhere below. I really like these pads. They have about 4,500 to 5,000 miles on them. They're still going strong. I've been riding through basically 2 winters now. I'm about halfway into the second winter, so we'll say a full winter of use plus a summer, and they're still going. So I'm pretty pleased overall. These are definitely the ones I'll get next time. So coming down, of course, we have the Honjo fenders here. These are a 62 millimeter wide fender, I believe, and they fit really well on this frame. I did have to do a little bit of clearancing here. I had to bend the fenders a little bit in here, a little bit down in the chainstay, a little bit up here at the front fork crown, but otherwise not a lot of actual deforming of the fenders were necessary to fit them on here. Coming on down to the cassette, this is a 9-speed. It's an 1132 Shimano XT cassette. And then I have a 9-speed Shimano Dior mountain bike with the long cage. The chain is an 11-speed chain, so that's something to note for later. Up front here on the crank, this is the Velo Orange. It's the subcompact double front crank set. So it's got a 46 and a 30 on the chain ring. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's what that is. I have the Shimano XTR pedals here. And then up here on the derailleur, this is a IRD Sub C. Works great. We'll get into that maybe later. Over here we have some pretty basic water bottle cages. These are stainless steel, but I have used the other style. Let me grab them real quick. If you are planning to run stainless steel water bottles, if you're planning to run stainless steel water bottles, you could get these. These work really well with stainless steel. This is made by King Cage, and I'll swap these back and forth sometimes when I want to use stainless steel water bottles. Okay, so right here coming up we have the Rene Harris Brazon. I just ordered the rear tail light. It's on the way. I got the one from Jitsencha, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, Jitsencha Studios in Berkeley. They have a model that I think looks really nice, so I'm going to go ahead and get that one, and it's designed for the rear Brazon. Coming up here, we have the down tube shifters. These are by Rivendell. These are Rivendell Silver down tube shifters. They are a friction-only shifter, and they are coupled with, as I said, the 9-speed Shimano mountain bike rear derailleur. It's a Dior, whatever. It's the Dior line, so not the highest end, but not the lowest end. Up here on the fork, we have a biplane fork crown, and this is designed to have a little more clearance for a wider front tire. We have a randonneuring rack. This is sort of like a mixture of this is a custom made rack, first of all, by John Fitzgerald at Fitz Cycles, who built the frame. He also built this rack, and this is sort of a mixture of a Porteur rack and a randonneuring rack, so it's a little bit wider, and but it still has the tombstone just like a regular randonneuring rack would have. And this is a great rack. If you do, I can't recommend enough, if you want a really well-fitting handlebar bag, get a custom rack and a custom handlebar bag, and don't look back because you won't regret it. The other part of this is I've got the Sun headlight here. This is the Sun E-Deluxe, and it has 3 settings: on, off, and then I think shadow. Well, there's a little S on there. I think that means shadow, but basically when you go through a shadow, it'll turn the light on. And of course, Honjo front fenders. We have the Sun. I don't know if you guys can see it. You probably can't. But down here on the hub, I'll show you later. It's basically the Sun wide body deluxe generator hub, and another high quality part that I can't recommend enough. Okay, so I think that covers all the main parts of the bike. The frame, if you recall, was made from standard diameter tubing, which is, I think, 1-inch top tube and 28.8 down tube with a 28 or 31. It's either a 31, yeah, maybe it's a 31.6 C tube, I think is what it is. It's a lugged construction, and you can see that, you can see the lugs. I didn't do a full custom paint or have anything chromed, so this bike is just purely powder coated, and it's some sort of a dark forest green, and there's an RAL number that is in one of the videos that I made on this bike build. So that's the bike components. I don't think I missed anything, but if I did, probably something minor. Oh, the rims. Yeah, the rims. I probably forgot the rims. So the wheels are a 650B Pacenti rim, and the rear is a Dura Ace hub. It's 130 millimeter spacing. The front standard 120. Okay, so let's talk about the ride. Let's talk about the bike. Let's do the review part of this video. So first off, I want to say, since I got this bike, it's been very difficult for me to ride the other bikes that I own. For one, the way it rides is so unique to anything that I've experienced before that once I started riding it, you go out on a bike, when you go out on a bike ride, or you choose to go out on a bike ride, there's just something about being on a bike that you're really comfortable on. And it may not be the lightest of my bikes. I have lighter bikes here, but it is the most comfortable, hands down, bike that I've ever ridden. The front fork was something that took me a little bit of time to get used to riding. It has a very big, if you look at it, it has a very large fork rake to it, or fork offset, I think is what they call. And what that does with the steel fork, and especially with a rim brake fork, is that it gives it so much flex that it's unlike any carbon fiber fork that I've ridden on. It's unlike a suspension fork. It's its own thing. And what I've noticed is that a couple things. One is that with the fork having such a large rake, the tire actually move, because the blades actually bend independent. the tire, if you're looking straight down over the tire, when you're out of the saddle, the tire will actually bend side to side because the fork blades are literally, if you're looking down, they're literally bending like this as you're pedaling. And that is it just, right then I realized, wow, this is a very flexible fork. Something I'd never experienced before. I've always had a carbon fork on most of my bikes other than my Specialized touring bike, but it didn't have as much offset. I think the offset, because it gives it that extra eccentricity of load, that it causes that real flexible movement. And at first I was not sure I liked it. I was thinking, oh man, I really was thinking of calling up John and saying, hey John, could you make another fork, because I'm not sure I really like this. But I never did, because I said, nope, you know, like anything new, you have to wait before you have to hold back on your judgment. I've made that mistake a couple of times where I jumped to conclusions right away, and then I later regretted making those conclusions so early. So I didn't want to make any conclusions early on. But having been riding this now, having been putting the miles on it, I've grown to just really value and really appreciate the way that fork feels. It absorbs a lot of buzz from the road. It absorbs a lot of harsh bumps when you're going off-road. Some of that is due to the tires, but a lot of it is actually the fork. When you combine that with the flex in the frame, the bike feels really good on the road. Now, it's at some point it is very, very flexible. It's way more flexible than like this carbon bike over here, or even the titanium bike. It's way more flexible. And so if you're looking for that performance feel where the bike is very stiff laterally, this is not the bike for you. This is the bike that when you step on it, it flexes. And you know, you can feel it. Sometimes it can feel almost a little, it takes a little getting used to. Let's just say that. There's a road at West Sonoma County called West Side Road. And there's a couple of these rollers that are, 2 to 3 minute climbs. And one of them, I decided to just push it. I haven't really gotten, on a climb, really just full gas to see if I could beat my record. And here it is, it's winter. Okay, so I decided to go for it. I want to see as fast as I could go, as hard as I can go on this frame up that climb and just see what it would do. I got home, I loaded up on Strava, and I was like a second off of my fastest time ever, which was actually on that titanium road bike over there, which weighs almost 10 pounds less. I think it's like it's probably like 7 or 8 pounds lighter. And I was within a second of my fastest time. And if you looked at that time, I think it was going back at least to 2015, somewhere around there, when I made that personal record. Moving on. So the front has a low trail front geometry, and that's become a real popular topic lately. Does low trail better than mid trail or high trail? And the only thing I would say about the low trail is that it's a compromise, really, because to have that, like I said, to have that really large fork rake, you end up lowering the trail because of it. So I don't know if it's really was intentional or it's unintentional. I feel like it was probably unintentional when bike builders were doing this a long time ago. And that was because there were a couple of reasons for doing the low trail. One is, I think, to get that extra spring effect on the fork, but also it helps for toe overlap, so you don't have, your toe bumping into the front fender. And other than that, it also increases the wheelbase a little bit, which could help for, I don't know. It's probably not enough to make a difference. But anyway, so I think the low trail's okay. I'm not a huge fan of it. I would rather be a little higher. This was something around 32, but I don't hate it. It is what it is in a sense, and I don't want to give up the toe overlap. I don't want to give up the springy fork. So I feel like it's the compromise that I have to just accept. I've gotten really used to it, and there are benefits to low trail as far as the handling, and that would just be for low speed climbing, the steering is very easy to keep the steering underneath you. So if you want, trying to go very select, let's say you're climbing a gravel road, it's very easy to correct for steering. And with a high trail bike, I feel like you tend to just feel like you're going to fall over the whole time. With low trail bike, you can just kind of sit there and just keep steering the bike, and it seems more stable at low speeds. At high speeds, it's also very stable. It is not unstable at high speeds. I feel like that's something you hear a little bit. Isn't it unstable at high speeds? No, it isn't, but it is sensitive to input. So once you pick your line and you're going straight, it doesn't just like want to do this. It'll track the line just fine. But when you go to steer, it doesn't take a lot of input to steer. Or leaning much. I mean, you don't have to lean much to get it to steer, but it's something you completely becomes, second nature after a few rides. So let's come on back now to the gearing, because the bike before that this basically replaced was a Specialized Expedition touring bike, and I had a triple crankset on it, and I really liked the triple on that bike. It gave me all kinds of options. I had the mid ring, which was a 40. I had the big ring, which was a 48, and then the small ring was a 28. On the back of that bike, I had an 1134, and I was running, it was a 9-speed also, and it was a friction shifter bike. It had down tube shifters. They were Sun Tour eccentric shifters. I don't know if you know what those are, but they were basically kind of a clamp-on style. They had a band that went around the down tube, and it clamped on, and it had a little cam in there that would trim the upper derailleur as you shifted the back derailleur. So it was kind of sophisticated, but I didn't think it actually worked all that well myself, so I didn't really like it. These silver shifters, on the other hand, work great. They have a little bit of a ratcheting mechanism inside, which is not to be confused with index shifting. It's just a ratchet. But it works really well. It allows you to kind of ratchet at the gear to sort of trim it where you want it. And I am running a 9-speed, and the compatibility is very good. I did have to put an 11-speed chain in here in order to get the clearances in the back to work out well. And I found that with a 9-speed chain, for some reason, it didn't shift as well with a 9-speed chain. I can't explain it other than because the chain's a little narrower. It gives you a little bit more room between the chain rings to allow for the clicks. There's a distance between each of these clicks in the ratchet, and I think that corresponds better with a narrower chain as far as trimming goes. I don't know exactly why, but that's my suspicion. But anyway, I've had to keep it on an 11-speed chain. Let's see, the front derailleur here works really well. One of the things I've been noticing because of how flexible this frame is, and the fact that this is friction shifting, was when it's in the big ring and I'm doing some big ring out of the saddle, like hard efforts, if the chain ring isn't exactly in the right spot, if the derailleur is not in the right spot, it'll actually push a little bit on the derailleur because the way the frame is flexing, and so it'll actually start to trim that derailleur. So I've opened up the cage a little to make a little more room, and that seems to have helped. However, there's now more of a chance to drop the chain because the cage has been opened up a little bit. So I don't think it would be a problem if you had index shifters or if you had brake lever shifters. Let's talk about the brakes. I'm sure some of you are interested in my thoughts on the brakes. These are center pull brakes. How do I like them? At first, like I said, I had those other blocks on there and I didn't care for them that much. But since putting these pads in and finally really figuring out how far the pads need to be away from the rim, as far as where to start your cable pull at, I've really dialed it in and I really like them now. At first I was like, I don't know, these aren't as good as advertised. I had read a lot of things online that people were saying that these are great brakes and you're going to love them and all this. And I was a little underwhelmed when I got them going. I do not recommend loading up a bike like this. I know there are people on the internet that will say it works and you can put a lot of load on a bike that's got thin tubing, but it's it's not going to handle it very well. One thing you'll notice is that it'll become really noodly really quickly. So if you're looking for a touring bike and you're looking for a really lightweight steel bike that rides well without weight, you need two different bikes. It's just not gonna be possible. I hope I covered everything. I'm sure I missed stuff. This is a great bike. It turned out to be really what I wanted and more. There was some initial learning and some initial, sorting out that needed to be done, but that's going to happen with any kind of custom frame or custom anything. So prepare yourself for that if you're going into this market. Otherwise, yeah, be ready to have a bike you're going to love, absolutely love, and you'll want to hang on to it probably forever. I am almost to the point where I kind of almost regret getting this bike because now I have no way to justify getting another one. So anyway, yeah. So those are my thoughts. This is my long-term review. I do need to do a long-term review on these tires at some point. These are the Parimotos, and again, I have about a little over 5,000 miles on them, and they're still going, which is amazing. But we'll do that maybe another video if you guys are interested. Otherwise, I guess I'm gonna end it there. I want to say thank you all for watching. Thank you all for the nice comments. I really appreciate them. I read all of them, and so thanks again for that. And hopefully you're all having a great start to the new year. Hopefully the winter we'll get through this winter and we'll have a nice spring coming up. So stay tuned for more videos, and have a nice evening. I'll see you in the next one.